Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for the Amazing Race 38 following episode 2, which was a pretty fun episode. I feel like there were plenty of interesting moments within it and some humor to go along with it, but we'll get to that soon enough. But we have 12 teams to talk about, and let's waste some more time. Let's go into the video. So starting off at number 12, we have the latest boots from the season, and here we have Angela and Lexi. And even though I had Angela and Lexi relatively high on my ranking last week, I'm not too surprised that they ended up going out here, considering that they were 10th place in leg 1 here. And for a lot of the leg, it felt like they were going out with them being towards the back of the pack. And while they were definitely fighting for that last spot with Megan and Turner, it felt like at the point where they finished that final task at the same time that Megan and Turner simply had the advantage in getting to the pit stop compared to them, where I felt like they were probably going to beat them there, to where it's not too shocking that Angela and Lexi ended up going out here. And on the whole, I felt like they were a pretty fun team, where obviously Angela is a pretty fun character in herself, and seeing her interact with her daughter was also pretty interesting. And while I wasn't expecting too much from them on the actual race here, I'm so glad we got them for the time that we did. But obviously they're not out of the race, so where they're here at number 12. And with that, we have 11 teams left in the race to talk about. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how lucky I think they are to win the race based on their edit and current game position. But number 11, the team that I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, is still Turner and Megan. And I do feel like they're the team that's clearly in the back of the pack the most consistently, to where they didn't really have much of a shot of creeping too far into the front of things, where if anything, they actually got pretty lucky that the teams in the back of the pack, and Angela and Lexi, Kylan and Taylor, and Kat and Alex all ended up on the same train as them, as I feel like if it wasn't for that delay, that they probably would have been outright eliminated in that spot. But instead, they got pretty fortunate that they got a bit of an equalizer, with there being a couple other teams that got there at the same time as they did. But even with that, I'm still not feeling that great about them, where obviously they have been towards the back of the pack for the first 2 legs. And even beyond that, I feel like their content has not been particularly great, where in this episode, they got a segment talking about how Megan likes to follow the rules more, while Turner's more impulsive, which makes me think that they're going to run into more issues down the road. And with more teams like clearly being set up well to do better, both from an edit perspective, but also from a race perspective, I feel like they're not set up particularly well here. And while they could continue to scrape on by for the next few legs, I feel like we're not meant to be seeing them as these underdogs that are going to eventually catch up. So because of that, I'm not feeling too great about them, and because of that, they're here number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have yet another team who I'm just not feeling that great about this point, but number 10, we do have Kat and Alex, who once again don't do particularly well in this leg, where they end up starting the leg in 11th place, only to finish in 10th place. And while they got pretty unlucky with their train getting delayed to where they were going to be towards the back of the pack regardless, I still feel like they didn't do overly impressively across the tasks there, to where I'm not too impressed by their overall race ability. Then also, I still don't feel like they're getting that strong of an edit at this point, where even though they got quite a bit to do in episode 1, I feel like that's not really setting them up to do particularly well, where if anything, it showed that they did have this history of not liking each other, and I could very well see them continuing to have conflict in the future. And while we didn't really see that much on this leg, I feel like they're not getting a strong edit, and with them also not being in a great race position at this point, I do have them here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have a team that actually did better across this leg than the previous 2 teams we talked about, but even so, I'm still not feeling that great about them. But at number 9, we do have Rubina and Christine, who end up having a bit of a drop off here, where they started off the leg in 4th place, only to drop off to 8th place by the end of it. And a lot of it coming down to their performance during the detour, where they really struggled with the memory task, to where they actually came into that task in 5th place, only to drop to 8th place by the time they finished it. So obviously that's not particularly great. And even beyond that, I still feel like their content is not particularly strong, where I feel like most of their content was about Tucker and how Rubina is having this friendly competition with them, where she's bragging when she gets ahead of Tucker and Eric after they messed up on the way to the detour. So obviously that's something at least, but beyond that, I feel like their performance here was not particularly strong, and I feel like they're not really set up to do well across the actual race here. And with them also not getting the biggest edit in the world, I did decide to leave them behind here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and this team has actually gone up compared to last week, but number 8, I did decide to go with Joseph and Adam, and I feel like this was a better episode for them, where for one, from a race perspective, they obviously did better, where they came into the leg in 8th place, they ended up finishing in 2nd place. Mind you, they did get pretty lucky by the whole train situation, where even though they got off on the wrong station, it ended up working out for them, where they were able to get a earlier ticket that got them in early, to where they really got catapulted into the front of the pack because of that. And from that point on, they were essentially in the top three the rest of the way, where even though Jag and Jazz clearly were winning there, they were fighting with Natalie and Stephanie for second place, and they do eventually edge out them in getting to second place there, which is actually funny considering that Natalie and Stephanie actually finished the detour before them. But yeah, Joseph and Adam were able to beat them afterwards, beating them to the marker and then to the pit stop there. So I did find that a little bit interesting. And even beyond that, they got at least some setup doing well in this leg where they talked about how their plan was to disarm other teams after their 8th place finish and how they hope to creep out the pack, which makes me think that they could be set up for this underdog story of being underestimated. However, I can also see the argument that this was situational, that they mainly got that content because they ended up doing well in this leg, getting the 2nd place finish. So I think we'll have to see how this carries over into future episodes, but I feel like for now, it was still a strong enough finish for them to where I decided to bump them up here to number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and this is a team who I feel like got pretty unlucky across this leg, but even so, I'm still kind of underwhelmed by them. But at number 7, we do have Kylan and Taylor, who I do feel like got pretty unlucky in this leg with them being like forced to take the later train there, despite them being like in an okay spot where they do end up like staying in 9th place the entire leg, sort of in the back of the pack there, being like one of those 4 teams like on that later train fighting for those last few spots, which is obviously pretty unlucky there. But at the same time, I feel like their edit in this episode was pretty underwhelming as well, to where they didn't really get much to do like early on in the episode, aside from talking about that how they had the Express Pass, which is kind of strange considering that they don't end up using the Express Pass there. And while I don't think they should have, considering that they were still relatively safe in the leg, being like clearly in front of the group that they were in, I still feel like they're not being presented as these major forces in the way that I would like, where I felt like after episode 1, I thought that they were going to be like these bigger characters on the show, but instead they're just kind of there, if I'm being honest, which I feel like is a major knock against them in terms of this power ranking. And while I still think they are a capable team, and while I still think they could possibly recover in the future, I feel like considering that they're not getting that big of an edit compared to other teams, and with them also not being in a great race spot at this point, I do have them here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have yet another team who I'm a bit underwhelmed by in terms of their actual performance and their presence on the show, but at number 6 we do have Chelsea and Jack here, who continue to be in the middle of the pack here, where they come into the leg in 6th place, they finish in 7th place, even getting up to 5th place coming out of the roadblock. However, they do eventually stumble a bit on the detour to where they do eventually finish in 7th place there. So I feel like there isn't really that much to say about them. And I feel like edit-wise, like they don't really stand out too much there. Or while they do get an intro package, like talking about how Jack is a firefighter, which relates to the roadblock, I still feel like they're not being set up to be like these major characters on the season. And with them also not impressing me that much across their actual race, I do have to leave them here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and this team has actually jumped up a few spots since last week, as I feel like this was a good enough episode for them, but at number 5 I did decide to go with Chada and Simone, and I feel like this was a pretty decent episode for them from an edit perspective, where they do get an intro package at the beginning, talking about how they have spent a lot of time apart, and how like this is making up for lost time, which is pretty good personal content for them, and also pretty unnecessary content as well. And they do follow it up with a interesting leg here where they do start off in 7th place. And while they do fall to 8th place during the roadblock and coming into the detour, they end up doing pretty well in the detour with the memory task to where they do jump up to 4th place. And they do eventually finish the leg in 5th place. So I feel like this was a solid leg for them where they do improve a bit. And with them also getting that solid personal content, I feel like it was definitely a step up for them compared to last week, where I feel like their premiere was pretty bad from an edit perspective, which was a major reason why they were relatively low. And while I would have preferred them to get that content in the premiere more so, I feel like the fact that they're at least getting it now, like, and especially in a leg where they do relatively well, was enough to have them a few spots higher, even though I still feel like I'm probably higher in other teams to where they're here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this is yet another team who has jumped up a good amount compared to last week, but at number 4 we do have Izzy and Paige. And very similar to Chada and Simone, I feel like they also got a pretty solid segment in the intro talking about how they don't look like athletes and they're hoping to be underestimated and to exploit people's low expectations of them, which also felt pretty unnecessary and definitely felt different from Joseph and Adam, to where they actually don't even do like exceptionally well in the leg, where if anything they actually lose pace, where they start off in 3rd place, they do drop to 6th place by the time they get to the destination. And while they do come into the detour in 4th place, they fall back to 6th place after that, and they do finish in 6th place. So it's actually like still like middle of the pack for them. And I feel like it's a bit different from Joseph and Adam, who got like this content about being underestimated before just jumping to 2nd place. Whereas I feel like Izzy and Paige, like I feel like there's at least more of an argument for them actually being set up to be like these true underdogs that can turn things around in the future. And if anything, like them being like middle of the pack here, I think kind of feeds into that perception where they're not in the back of the pack. They're not in as immediate danger of being targeted. However, they're also like still being shown the show when I feel like it wasn't necessary to be shown. So I actually feel like this is a pretty solid episode for Izzy and Paige, all things considered. And while we'll need to see how they do moving forward, I feel like it was a good enough episode to have them here on number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we actually had the same top 3 as last week, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 3, I actually had the same team as I had last week in the spot, and here we have Natalie and Stephanie. And I feel like Natalie and Stephanie did pretty well in this leg here, where they also get pretty benefited by the train situation where due to them getting off at the wrong station, they do end up getting an earlier ticket, and they are in the top 3 for the rest of the way there, and they do ultimately get a 3rd place finish there, which is pretty good. Now, in terms of their edit, I feel like they didn't get that much to do in this episode, but I feel like they also got a pretty solid premiere to where I feel like it's not even that big of an issue, if I'm being honest. And with them also having a pretty solid performance on this leg here, I feel pretty decent about Natalie and Stephanie right now. And we'll have to see how they do in future weeks. I feel like it's still a pretty solid showing for them to where they're here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I actually had the same team as I had in number 2 last week, and that is Tucker and Eric, who end up having a really insane leg here where first up, they do come into the leg in 2nd place. However, they do get a bit unfortunate by the train situation where they are technically on that first train and they do get off at the right station, but because of the mishap with the other 3 teams, they do end up falling to 4th place by the time they get to their destination there. And they do well enough for the roadblock initially, but then they have a really funny moment where they end up stumbling upon the clue box that appears after the detour, and they end up going to the pit stop without doing the detour, only to be turned away and having to go back, which is pretty funny, and actually fall to 7th place because of that. But they somehow managed to recover pretty well, where despite them doing the memory task over the glass task, they actually managed to still do pretty well at that task, jumping back to 5th place. And they actually managed to outrun Chada and Simone to where they end up getting 4th place anyway, and they even have enough time to stop to get ice cream on the way to the pit stop, which is also pretty funny. So I do feel like this is actually a somewhat impressive leg for them in the sense that they end up falling behind due to their own mistake, but they end up recovering to where by the end it didn't make a difference. And I think that's a major reason why I do have them at least this high on the list, to where even though they're still a team that's prone to making mistakes, I feel like just inherently I would have a lot of confidence in Tucker and Eric to do well at a lot of these tasks, as we literally see them like in this episode. Like, it felt like they were never really in much danger of falling too far behind despite their mistake. And obviously, while it's still questionable that they made that mistake to begin with, I feel like they're still a team that I would expect to do pretty well there. And with them also getting a somewhat favorable edit with them setting up this rivalry to Jag and Jazz and talking about how they want to like fight with the best, essentially, I do feel like they're still a team that's set out to make a relatively deep run this season to where they're here at number 2. And now at number 1, the team that I believe is the most likely to win the Amazing Race 38 at this current point is still Jag and Jazz, who end up getting their 2nd win in a row here, which is all pretty good. Now again, they do get pretty lucky by the train situation that allowed them to be in the front of the pack to begin with. However, they are still in the front of the pack the entire time, to where even with Joseph and Adam and Natalie Stephanie like getting there to the destination at the same time as them, they're still clearly in first place the entire time. They never let go of that lead. And again, I feel like Jag and Jazz are another team who I have a lot of confidence in, with Jag obviously being a pretty notorious comp beast on his season of Big Brother, and with them also clearly doing well on the race here. But even aside from their performance, I still feel like they're being propped up in the edit to where they get another personal segment early on in the episode talking about how like they have a close bond and how they want to be like representatives of the Sikh community on TV, how they never saw anyone like them on TV growing up, and how they want to be that for the next generation. So I feel like they're clearly a team that we're meant to be rooting for, a team that we want to be doing well, and they clearly are doing well considering they're in the front of the pack. So I feel like from both an edit and race perspective, I feel like they're clearly the front runners here. With even Tucker and Eric, I feel like they're clearly getting a better edit compared to them. So I feel like Jag and Jazz are still the front runners to win the season at this point, to where they're still here at number 1. And there we go. That'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe like it has with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so be on the lookout for that. I'm covering Survivor 489 and Hell's Kitchen, so if you want videos on those shows, be on the lookout for that. I'm on Patreon and have a YouTube membership if you want to consider supporting the channel. You can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.